And hello, everybody. This is your host for Double Cross Radio, Chuck Horton, and I'm coming to you live from the heart of freedom. That's the state of Jefferson, which is extreme Northern California. And I don't mean extreme politically. I mean like the furthest northernest most parts of California and the southernest most southern parts of Oregon, which basically are the Siskiyou Mountains and the foothills that surround them. And it's just a beautiful place to live. It's a wonderful place, actually. And happy to be with you for another Thursday edition of talking about freedom. Tonight, I thought I would start by reading a short piece out. It's a part of an epilogue to a book that was written by somebody I admire very much. I'll tell you who the author was after I finish reading it. Excuse me for clearing my throat. I've had too much talking today. I never tire of looking out of windows of airplanes. For all of human history, until just about the day before yesterday, no living person saw the world like this. People could climb up to the top of a mountain and see the valleys below, but to see the whole world view looking straight down was just a privilege of birds and God. Then about 100 years ago, this changed, and we could see what we really never experienced directly. It's not raw nature that enthralls me. It's cities. It's the small towns. It's the lights. It's the vast cultivated farmland. It's the seeming orderliness of human civilization that was no one's plan, but rather emerges through the bit-by-bit creation of minds. Everything we see was once an idea, and then it was made real through action. Despite all the pretense by government and the arrogance of its officials and the planning mindset of its bureaucrats, what you see out the window of the plane is essentially ordered anarchy, the evidence of what millions of explosive units of creativity, also known as people, can build when they are all cooperating in pursuit of their own self-interest. Now, this is part of a book that was written by Jeffrey Tucker, who's one of my favorite personalities in the liberty movement. And it's the epilogue to the book called The Beautiful Anarchy. And it goes on to talk about some other things. It had some really interesting observation in this last epilogue, which is more like a short essay or something. But it made me think about a lot of things, just that one part. It made me think about, what does government give us? Well, almost nothing. There's a piece that we put on our Facebook page earlier this week, and it was written by Brandon Smith at, where is that? Well, I think I went right by it. It was written by Brandon Smith of Liberty, Personal Liberty. And a quote from this story, I think this is a really great story. You should all read it. It's fabulous. Brandon Smith is really, really smart guy, and he's a really deep thinker. But he said in the part of this story, he said, at the bottom, the only viable purpose of any central government is to safeguard individual liberty. All other claims and supposed benefits are irrelevant. Infrastructure, food and water, health, education, public security, all of these issues can be provided for at a local level by common people without the aid of central authority. In a culture where vigilance is encouraged rather than labeled paranoia, in a culture where productivity is enabled rather than obstructed, in a culture where free thought is treated with interest rather than disdained, government holds no value. I thought, wow, this is wisdom. Brandon Smith writes a weekly column at Personal Liberty, and he's written some of my favorite things I've read in the last 2-3 years. He's an amazing thinker and modern-day philosopher. But these two things are related. The things that make us who we are as a people, as a part of the human race, the things that we take pride in being a part of, they aren't created by government. They're created by individuals. They're created by individuals who are trying to serve their own self-interest. And if this sounds like I'm starting to wax a little poetic or whatever, it's just think and try and imagine anything that has happened in the last 100 years that has really been a product of government. And some people will always come up with something like, well, they invented Tang for the space program or something like that. And you know, there might be a few things that they've done that have been okay. Mostly they pay people to create weapons of death and destruction. They stifle the creativity of innovative people through regulation and poor application of intellectual property laws. And anyway, all of these two things kind of got me. I'm thinking, as I always do, what am I going to have for show Thursday night? And I really liked that introduction to the end of the epilogue, the last chapter of Jeffrey's book. And I really liked those first 3 paragraphs. They were just amazing. It really put me into a lot of thinking mode for a long time, or 2 or 3 days. My wife thought I was upset or something. I said, no, I'm just thinking. And I really can't think of anything that government gives us other than chains and more chains and heavier burdens to carry. But that's just me. But I didn't want to talk this whole time about just how much I have disdain for government. Government's here. It's not going to go away anytime soon. I can live with it. I'm a big boy. And so I'm going to. What I would like to do tonight is to try and talk about some of the amazing things that we do without government. And some of them government helped. But I was thinking about, first of all, I started out thinking just how did the airplane change our lives? Think what it was like before there was an airplane. 19th century, there wasn't even cars. I remember my grandmother was born right at the turn of the century. And even she moved to Medford, where we live now, in 1908. She was 7 years old at the time. And I remember growing up how sometimes we'd be at family retreats. My grandmother and grandfather had a very rustic cabin up at Diamond Lake. And it was it was awesome to be out in a kind of a primitive setting where you were away from the trappings of society, and you just were kind of out there, and you could imagine this is how people might have lived 100 years ago. Because we didn't have electricity up there. We used kerosene lamps. We burned wood for heat. We had a well that we pumped by hand. We had an outdoor outhouse, which we still have. I don't own the cabin. I visited there a couple times the last few years. It's still standing, by the way. And she would tell us when we were sitting around the fire at night, kind of not quite tired enough to go to sleep, and it's too dark to do too much of anything. And she'd tell us about life when she was a child, and she grew up in the first 7 years of her life in St. Paul, Minnesota. And her father was a fairly wealthy man. They had a horse-drawn carriage, not just a wagon. And he had a team of horses, not just a single horse. And that was kind of like the sign of affluence. So it cost a lot of money to feed. I think they had 4 horses, but I'm not sure they used them all the time. My memory isn't quite as vivid as hers. Anyway, I guess started thinking about her whole life. Here she was. She grew up being driven around town in a carriage with 4 horses. I think it was 4 horses. And during her life, she saw the invention of the automobile, or it actually was invented before she was born, but I mean the proliferation of an automobile, the Model T and other cars. She saw invention of a lot of things like radios, TVs, the first personal computers. She saw travel with she saw airplanes. She saw them used for travel. We had one of the early planes that were built couldn't go a long ways without stopping to refuel. So Medford was a really pretty hot spot for the travelers because it was about halfway between Portland and San Francisco and just about the right place for a plane to stop, refuel, and then take off again. So Medford's airport was quite a bit larger than it deserved to be for the size of the town, and we probably still have a pretty good airport for as small a city as we are. Although it's kind of expensive to fly in and out of Medford these days because it isn't a place where the planes want to stop and refuel. So they can fly all the way from San Francisco to Portland without stopping, and they would rather do that. Serve more people, it's less expensive and all that. But anyway, she saw that. She saw, and I was with her at this time. This was amazing. July of 1969, we were in San Francisco at a retail gift show. And as my grandmother always did, she would take my brother and I to a baseball game when we were down there. And we would watch the baseball game, and then we'd drive home. That was our payoff. If we were good, and by 1969, I was like 18 years old. So she didn't really have to bribe me. I wasn't really an adult yet, but I thought it was kind of interesting going to the gift shows. My brother was a few years younger, and I don't know if he liked the baseball games as much as I did, but it gave us something to look forward to. We'd get outside, and so here we are at the old Candlestick Park, and we're watching the game, and partway into the game, the game kind of stopped. The umpires held up things, and the message boards on the stadium, it said, and it wasn't fancy scoreboard like they have today. It kind of typed out the words on like a reader board type thing. And it says, the Apollo 11 lander has touched down on the moon. And the crowd just went crazy. And a few innings later, a real oddity occurred. The pitcher for the San Francisco Giants is Gaylord Perry. He's also well known for his spitballs and grease balls and Vaseline balls and everything else that he used to get people out. He hit his first major league home run. He'd been in the big leagues for quite a while. He wasn't a great hitter, but he was a big, strong country boy, and he happened to lay into one and hit a home run. And this is memorable because the next day I was at home, and I went and I bought a San Francisco Chronicle so I could read about the game, which we had to leave early because it's a long drive from San Francisco back to Medford, and they wanted to get in before midnight, and it was a doubleheader. I think it was a double. It was or extra innings, there was some reason we had to leave before the game was over. I don't remember exactly what that circumstance was, but I wanted to read about the finish and ending, so I bought a San Francisco Chronicle that day so I could read about the game. And here's a story about a sports writer who remembered when Gaylord Perry was a rookie at the Arizona spring training, and he was hitting some batting practice balls and just hitting some towering fly balls out of the ballpark that they used for the spring training. And one of the other reporters had commented to I think it was Herman Franks, that, hey, that Perry looks like he's got quite a bat. Maybe you'll be able to use him in some other capacity in the lineup other than just as a pitcher. And Herman Franks turned around and he said, they'll put a man on the moon before this guy hits a home run. And true to his statement, approximately 25 minutes before he hit his first major league home run, they put a man on the moon. So it showed what a visionary Herman Franks was. years before that happened. But that's kind of an aside to my story. Other things in her life that she saw. I mean, she witnessed the discovery of penicillin and how it saved lives and extended life for a lot of people. She saw a lot of things that weren't so good. She saw World War I, World War II. She saw the Great Depression. She saw the Korean War, the Vietnam War. In fact, a lot of the years of her life were taken up with warfare, the United States being engaged in war. And that wasn't so good part to think, but that was something that's a creation of government. The things that were amazing were the creations of individuals. And that, I think, is the remarkable part of her life, is the things that occurred during her life that were brought about by the efforts of individuals. Now, I'm going to tell you about a couple of individuals that they're tied into our topic tonight. They were, I'm not going to say they were the inventors of the airplane, because there were other people that had similar products at about the same time. I think they were the first people to have a good airplane, one that was, this is going to go somewhere. They were the inventor of several mechanical adaptations that enabled their airplane to be the best. They had the best propeller, the most efficient propeller. Their design for propellers is patented, and it's still in use today. Every propeller-driven plane is using a propeller that was designed by the Wright brothers, and they can't improve on the design. That's what they use. There are a few things they've done to alter them a little bit. They have a lot on these turboprop planes. They can change the tilt of the blades a little bit so they can get more thrust or use it as a braking action, and so they've made some slight modifications like this. But the basic shape and angle of the blades is something that they designed through trial and error. Largely, they built their own little wind tunnel and tried different designs and painstakingly carved out different designs and tried them out. And they finally found the one that worked the best. That's what they picked out, and they made draftings of it, and they filed a patent for it. They also are credited with the invention of the 3-axis control, which enabled the pilot to steer an aircraft effectively and maintain its equilibrium. This also is used still today. And these were just two guys. They were tinkerers. They were kind of hobby engineers. I mean, they did it as something that fascinated them, something that they liked machines. They had been in the printing business. They had a bicycle shop, which they still were operating at the time of their tinkering with aircraft. They knew a little bit about engines. They were one of the people that worked for them helped them build the engine that became the power behind that. Their aircraft was a pusher. That means that the propeller was behind where the guy sat, so that it was pushing the plane through the air, and the front wings, there was two of them, they would provide the lift, and it would kind of lift the whole thing off the ground. Anyway, the Wright brothers were extraordinary individuals. Wilbur was the older, but Orville was born August 19th, 1871, and Wilbur April 16th, 1867. Wilbur died in 1912 at age 45, and Orville died in 1948 at age 76. And their education, Orville dropped out of high school his junior year, or he completed his junior year. So he had 3 years of high school. Wilbur completed high school. So they weren't trained engineers. They taught themselves kind of how to do all this stuff, how to make drafting drawings and those types of things. And they were, make no doubt about it, they were excellent self-taught engineers. Let's see. Let's stop umming here and get on to something. Let's see. When Orville dropped out of high school after his junior year, he did it. He didn't do it because he was just bored with school. He did it because he had an opportunity to start a printing business. So he started a printing business. He was probably 16, 17 years old. And he designed and built his own printing press with Wilbur's help. And then Wilbur later joined the print shop. Now, Wilbur Wilbur was a very athletic person, had a promising, I don't know that they had careers in athletics at that time, but he was playing hockey with some friends and ended up getting hit in the face by a hockey stick, and it knocked out his front teeth. And even though it wasn't really that severe, he had kind of became withdrawn. He had plans to attend Yale, and he canceled those. So, I mean, these guys were not lacking in intellectual skills. And I think as Orville's starting the printing press kind of gave Wilbur something to live about, or to gave him a focus in his life. And so, anyway, the printing shop was modest success. It wasn't great. They did everything they could to save money. They still lived at home with their parents. In fact, Wilbur was taking care of his mother, who was quite sick at the time. She ended up passing away from tuberculosis. And they continued to live at home basically their entire life. They and there's a picture in the, well, actually not a picture. There's an actual bicycle that they built that's in the National Air and Space Museum in Smithsonian. And you look at this bike and you say, well, that's not so different than the 10-speed, 15, 20, 30-speed bikes that they build today. It's definitely a racing bicycle, or something that's meant to go fast, to cut down wind resistance. And it's pretty close to the bicycles you'd see in a bicycle shop today. This was about 120 years ago. Now they had there was a big problem with gliders. Everybody knew you could have a glider. You could get out there and you could glide. But if you had a crosswind, the plane was very unstable. It would flip it over in the air and you just crash. You'd lose your lift. There's no way to twist and torque the wings to continue to give you lift so you could turn or go up or down. It was, you kind of went where if you had a good conditions, you just kind of glided in the wind, and that's all you did. It's kind of like a paper airplane, only worse, because it's totally out of control. And they kind of just kind of messing around with a box, like I think it was might have been a cardboard box, but they were kind of twisting it, and they realized that by twisting the wings the way they were kind of twisting this box, you could change the face of the wing that was to the direction that the wind was coming. So you could take advantage of a crosswind, or to, one, be more stable, and to continue to have lift. And then they went about engineering a design that would allow them, with their control stick they had invented, or they invented in the process, to change the way the wing was structured so it could take advantage of that, and they could bank into a turn or whatever. They became more like a bird when they were out there in the air. This amazing discovery. And these are people that were not engineers. One of them didn't finish high school. They had worked in a printing shop. They had built some bicycles. Keep this in mind the whole time. Okay, close to the turn of the century, this is about the time my grandmother was born, Wilbur put warping to the test by building and flying a biplane kite that had a 5-foot wingspan. When the wings were warped or twisted, one end of the wings produced more lift and the other less lift. Unequal lift made the wings tilt or bank. The end with the more lift rose, the other end dropped, causing a turn in the direction of the lower end. Warping was controlled by 4 cords attached to the kite. The cords led to 2 sticks held by the kite flyer, who tilted them in opposite directions to twist the wings. So this is the basis for that control that they later invented. They made a control that enabled them to do the same thing. Anyway, they realized that in order to have a man on a powered flight, they had to have enough lift from the wings to pull up all that weight. And they needed bigger and bigger wingspans, and they needed bigger and bigger engines, which added to the weight. So they had to find better ways to make the engines so it would they had better ways to make an engine that could power this, because it had to move through the air with enough speed to lift all that weight off the ground. And they had a lift equation. The lift was equal to coefficient of air pressure times the total area of lifting surface in square feet times the velocity squared in miles per hour. That's headwind plus ground speed. And CL, which is the coefficient of lift, and it varied with the wing shape. And they worked and worked and worked, and they finally had gliders that were steerable, I guess is the best word. 1901 time around then, and they did several things at Kitty Hawk. In North Carolina, and they did a lot of they did a lot of other things. There were other people working on airplanes at the same time. Well, let's see. They made improvements on their gliders and on and on and on. I'm going to kind of skip forward. If you want to read about them, there's a great history of them in the Wikipedia, and that's kind of what I'm using as my outline for this. Okay, so the brothers, they discovered the purpose of a movable vertical rudder. Its role was not to change the direction of flight, as a rudder does in sailing, but rather to aim or align the aircraft correctly during banking turns and when leveling off from turns and wind disturbances. The actual turn, that's the change in direction, was done with a roll control using wing warping. The principles remained the same with ailerons when the ailerons superseded wing warping. So all the work they had done with the kites, the gliders, the three direction joystick, I guess you'd call it, the 3-axis control lever, all that work was then put into play with these fabulous gliders that were really something. I mean, they could go quite a ways in them and turn. Well, then they finally came up with a lightweight motor that was able to generate enough power to move the plane fast enough to create the lift that they needed to get it off the ground and to fly. And then, and they did this by designing a propeller. Now, in March 1903, Wilbur made an entry in his notebook indicating that the prototype propeller that they were using was 66% efficient, which is pretty good. And modern wind tunnel tests on reproduction of the 1903 propellers show that they were more than 75% efficient under the conditions of the first flights, and actually had a peak efficiency of 82%, which is just amazing, considering this was a trial and error that they got that close to perfect results. They wrote to several engine manufacturers, but none met their need for a sufficiently lightweight engine. They turned to their shop mechanic, Charlie Taylor, who built an engine in just 6 weeks. Now, get this. They had written to several engine manufacturers, and none of them could help them. They couldn't. They said it's impossible to build something that lightweight and have it be able to. But their shop mechanic in their bicycle shop was able to do it in 6 weeks. To keep the weight low, the engine block was cast from aluminum. It was a rare practice for the time. The Wright Taylor engine had a primitive version of a carburetor. It had no fuel pump. Gasoline was gravity fed from the fuel tank mounted on the wing strut into a chamber next to the cylinders where it was mixed with air. The fuel-air mixture was then vaporized by heat from the crankcase, forcing it into the cylinders. The propeller-driven chains, resembling those of bicycles, were supplied by the manufacturer of heavy-duty automobile chains. The Flyer cost less than $1,000, in contrast to more than $50,000 in government funds given to Samuel Langley for his man-carrying great Aerodome. And that's something else you want to read about. This guy, Samuel Langley, he had gotten government to fund his stuff, and he was just soaking up the money. Now, $50,000 in 1903 would buy, let's see, $20 would buy an ounce of gold. So that kind of gives you how much money that was. So that would be, could have got about 4,000 ounces of gold, which would be about $500,000 today. They built theirs for less than $1,000 total. This was individual versus government. Government was destroying wealth. They were providing it. They were producing innovations right and left, which are still in use today. Okay. 5 people witnessed the first flight. John Daniels made the first flight photo using Orville's preposition camera. And Will Doe, of all of the U.S. government coastal lifesaving crew, area businessman W.C. Brinkley, and Johnny Moore, a teenage boy who lived in the area, all witnessed this, along with Adam Etheridge and John T. Daniels. Oh, I already said John T. Daniels. After they'd had 4 flights, a severe or a powerful wind came up and it flipped the plane over several times and damaged it and never flew again. The brothers shipped it home, and years later, Orville restored it, lending it to several U.S. locations for display, then to a British museum. And if you want to know why he didn't loan it to, like, the Smithsonian, for instance, you should read about that dispute, because the Smithsonian would not validate that they were the first powered flight. Let's see. In 1904, they built a Flyer 2, which, and they didn't want to expend a lot of money traveling back and forth between where they lived and the coast, where they had all those winds that they would use for the gliders. So they received permission to use a field rent-free from the owner and bank president Torrance Huffman. And they invited reporters to their first flight attempt on May 23rd on the condition that no photographs be taken. Engine troubles and slack winds prevented any flying, and they could only manage a very short hop a few days later, with fewer reporters present. Library of Congress historian Fred Howard noted, with some speculation, the brothers may have intentionally failed to fly in order to cause reporters to lose interest in their experiments. Well, if it was intentional or not, that's what happened. And free from all the distractions of the reporters hanging around, they also lessened the chance of less innovative people stealing their ideas and learning from their successes and mistakes. They had also made a decision to withdraw from the bicycle business and concentrated on creating and marketing a practical airport. Now, this was financially risky since neither one was wealthy nor government funded like everybody else was. They did not have the luxury of being able to give away their invention. It was to be their livelihood. Thus, their secrecy intensified, encouraged by advice from their patent attorney. At this place where they were, it's Huffman Prairie. It's just a cow pasture, 8 miles northeast of Dayton. The lighter winds made takeoff harder. They couldn't point the plane into the wind to get extra lift by flying into the wind. So they had to have more horsepower. They had to have a longer runway. Actually, in those days, they used a rail. They sent it down a rail like a monorail type thing. They had some other problems which they fixed one after another. I mean, each time they would solve one problem, another one, it would sort of show that there was still some other thing to fix, and they patiently worked and solved all these problems. And on August 13th, this was still 1904, they made an unassisted takeoff. Wilbur finally exceeded their best Kitty Hawk effort with a flight of 1,300 feet. Then they decided to use a weight-powered catapult to make takeoff easier and used it the first time on September 7th. On September 20th, Wilbur flew the first complete circle in history by manned, heavier-than-air-powered machine covering 4,080 feet in about a minute and a half. And that's about a mile. He was going pretty close to 60 miles an hour. See, by the end of the year, the brothers had accumulated about 50 minutes in the air in 105 flights over rather soggy 85 acres. Remarkably, this pasture is virtually unchanged today from its original condition and is now part of Dayton aviation heritage, as it should be. This is amazing. So, in July 14th, 1905, Orville suffered a bone-jarring, potentially fatal crash, and it made them rebuild the flyer with the forward elevator and rear rudder both enlarged and placed several feet further away from the wings. And they also installed a separate control for the rear rudder instead of linking it to the wing warping cradle as before. Each of these modifications greatly improved stability and control, enabling a series of 6 dramatic long flights ranging from 17 to 38 minutes. 38 minutes. By the way, my grandmother she would have been 4 years old at this time. Now, these guys were remarkable men. They weren't perfect. They were remarkable, though. And the thing that was remarkable about them, and this is going to be kind of a theme of several of our upcoming shows, they were remarkable because they had a passion for what they were doing. They knew that this was going to be their living. They were the first. They put everything they had into this project. They were going to succeed at this, or they were going to die trying, more or less. They had done everything they could to save money. They lived at home, like I said. They never married, neither one of them. Their sister helped them with the bicycle shop until they decided to sell. And I think the reason they decided to get out of the bicycle shop was more because their sister fell in love and got married, for which I think one of the brothers never really forgave her. But I think that was the main reason why they decided they just couldn't do everything. They had to give up something, and they gave up the bicycle business. Their only source of income, really. So they were putting everything onto this, and because that was their passion. And they lived, they slept, they dreamed, they ate, they drank. Everything was plane. They called it the Flyer. Let's see, and this was in Colonel J.E. Capper, later the superintendent of the Royal Balloon Factory, became a friend with them, and Capper and his wife were visiting the United States to investigate the aeronautical exhibits at the St. Louis World's Fair, which is not terribly distant from Dayton, Ohio. And he had been given a letter of introduction to both Chanute, who was the guy that was given the $50,000 grant, and the Wrights by Patrick Alexander. Capper was favorably impressed by the Wrights, who showed him photographs of their aircraft in flight. The Wright brothers were certainly complicit in the lack of attention they received, because they were really feared that people with less wherewithal were going to steal their ideas that they had just been spending their lives creating, innovating, and doing. So they really kind of parked the plane. They didn't have a patent. The patent office didn't think this was an invention. They had to see proof. They didn't want to show them proof because they're afraid that people would copy it. It's this whole idea of patents. It doesn't stimulate progress. It kind of holds it back. If there was no patent, they would want to rush to be the first one to get it out there. And the notoriety would give them everybody would want to have something built by the Wright brothers. It would make them it's like Coca-Cola and Pepsi. It's called a Coke, not a Pepsi. Some people call it Pepsi. But Pepsi realizes how important it is to have it called after or named after you. So they've worked to work that into the culture. But so the Wright brothers made no flights at all in 1906, 1907. They spent their time attempting to persuade U.S. and European governments that they had invented a successful flying machine and were prepared to negotiate a contract to sell such machines. They also experimented with a pontoon and engine setup on the Miami River of Ohio, that's in Ohio, in hopes of flying from water. These experiments, however, proved unsuccessful. Replying to the Wrights' letters, the U.S. military expressed virtually no interest in their claims. Now, this is government again. See, government doesn't give us stuff. Government doesn't. They're not helping these people. Think of all the ways airplanes have changed our lives, and these guys are just begging for someone just to let us build these for you. There'll be help, whatever. And they wouldn't. They still didn't get the help they needed, or even the attention they needed from any government. It wasn't just the United States. It was governments in Europe either. Okay, so in let's see, they did some other things. They made the Flyers a little more powerful. They were able to take a passenger for the first time. Anyway, let's see. Let's get on here to the end because we're running out of time. I only got 15 minutes left in the show. I didn't want to just keep telling. You can read all about this. There's a lot of interesting things in here, but they finally decided on or came upon this strategy that where they would make a proposal to the U.S. Army of the military advantages of having an observation aircraft that could fly over enemy lines, photograph their positions, turn and fly back and land, and give that information to the to the people that were on the ground. And anyway, they decided that they knew what their plane could do, and they decided that tell the Army, you really need to get a plane that can do this and can do this and can do this. So you need to have like a contest to see who can build planes that can do these things, knowing that their plane was capable of doing this. So they're kind of setting it up for themselves. But that's at the same time, all these other clowns were getting government grants to build things that, I mean, you've seen them in these movies you can see them on YouTube, the wacky machines, the old early flying attempts, and they were not going to fly. People knew they weren't going to fly, and they would just say, "Oh, we're making progress. We learned a great deal from this. This one didn't quite work, but we're going to get powered flight soon. Look how much closer we are now." And it's just kind of like that whole thing they do with like cystic fibrosis and MDA. That we know what the cures are, but they keep hiding that. They keep, well, we're getting closer and we're getting closer. They just kind of keep sucking money out of something to keep these things going, because they really don't want there to be powered flight. They want there to be a continuing string of failures, because the government will just keep giving them money. Government, all it does is destroy wealth. It doesn't build wealth. Keep remembering that. So anyway, they were having a problem with the U.S. government, and they decided, well, France is interested. Let's go. They went there. This kind of got the attention of the Army, and so they finally had their deal. They ran into all sorts of problems with their patent. They had written it themselves, and they even had I think the problem they ran into is that their illustration was of a non-powered flying machine. It was the 1902 glider that they had done a lot of their testing on. The patent's importance lies in its claim of a new and useful method of controlling a flying machine, powered or not. The technique of wing warping is described, and the patent explicitly states that other methods instead of wing warping could be used for adjusting the outer portions of the machine's wings to different angles. Well, anyway, there was this big patent war they had. The patent war is something that is also it's a creation that's there because of government. And these guys are just trying to make a living. Anyway, on and on and on. They eventually won their patent wars. And then when they sold their patents to the company, to the Wright company, which was themselves with other people, they got about a third of the shares of the company. It's $1 million stock issue and about 10% royalty on every airplane sold. They also they got about, they got some money too, some cash. And some of these patents are still being used today. That's what's amazing. That's how awesome these two guys were. Wilbur died of typhoid fever in 1912. And that was really sad. Orville lived a much longer life, and anyway, he did not like the way the Smithsonian's presented the history of the invention of the powered flight. He thought that they didn't get enough credit for what they'd done. So he just didn't let them use any of his things until he. I think they eventually gave him. Charles Lindbergh even attempted to mediate this dispute. It was so weird. As I said, neither brother married. Wilbur once quipped that he did not have time for both a wife and an airplane. That was following a brief training flight he gave in Berlin to a German pilot in June 1911. My grandmother was 11 years old then. Orville, he was the president of the Wright Company upon Wilbur's death, sharing Wilbur's distaste for business, but not his brother's executive skills. Orville sold the company in 1915 after 42 years living at their residence. Orville, Catherine, and their father Milton moved to Hawthorne Hill in the spring of 1914. Milton, that would be his father, died in his sleep 3 years later, and at the age of 88. And Orville made his last flight as a pilot in 1918 in a 1911 Model B, and my grandmother would have been 18 years old then. And soon after the 1918 last flight, Catherine married Henry Haskell of Kansas City, a former Oberlin classmate, and Orville was furious and inconsolable, feeling he'd been betrayed by Catherine. He finally agreed to see her, apparently, at another sibling's insistence just before she died of pneumonia in March of 1929. And that was, that's kind of their history. But history is full of people's accomplishments and the things that they did, but it doesn't really always communicate to people the passion that leads to these people to these accomplishments. And that's kind of what I was hoping to bring out today a little bit. We're going to have, in the coming weeks, we're going to have Mary Ruwart, who's she's involved in the medical field. She used to be an administrator, and she left because she felt like there was too much stuff that was being covered up and their goals and objectives no longer were to help people. And she's written an amazing book, and we're going to help her to promote that. She's just coming out with a new one, I believe, and that's why we couldn't get her until later this month. She'll be coming up on the 27th of August. We hope to get Jeffrey Tucker still. I haven't had time to really bug him about it, and he's a busy guy, and if he's not able to, that's okay. I mean, we're Double Crossed Radio, and we have some great shows from time to time, and we have some mediocre shows from time to time, but these guys have other things to do in their life, and sometimes we can be helpful, and I don't think we were ever detrimental, but it's always entertaining conversation when we have a brilliant mind like Jeffrey Tucker or Jeff Berwick or even my good friend and former broadcast partner Drew Lamb. We have some great conversation. We probably had our best conversations off the air, but getting back to the subject, the Wright brothers, their passion for doing this thing with the airplane, the flight, the thing that nobody else has ever done before, to be the first. What did they give up? They gave up the chance of being married. They gave up. They gave up so much about. They had a successful bicycle business. It wasn't making them rich, but it was successful. They gave up. They gave up all sorts of things that you and I would say, oh, if I could have this, I would be happy. They didn't even want them. They only wanted to fly, have the plane, to be the leaders in this new industry, to be the people that are the cutting edge of what was happening. And that drove their every waking moment. What they were going to do today, what they're going to do tomorrow, what they're going to do next week. It was all about a plane, the flying plane, a machine, powered flight. It was their life. And where would we be if they had said, oh, I think I'm going to give up on this plane thing and get married and have a family? Well, certainly somebody would have sooner or later come across a plane. They would have figured it out. But I think it may have been 20 or 30 years later. Maybe even longer. Who knows? Just remember that the inventions they made for controlling the stability of the wings, they're still being used today. The propellers, they were 82% efficient under ideal conditions. Still in use today. These were amazing men. Their passion has made all of our lives better. They need to be celebrated. We need to encourage this kind of passion in our children. We need to have we we need to celebrate the people in our community that have this kind of a desire to accomplish something. We need to support them with their ideas, and not just financially, but we need to encourage them. We need to help them to promote what they're doing, to find uses for what they're doing. We need to be cooperating with them because it makes everybody's life better. These guys were doing all this. They had tremendous financial sacrifices to do it. These guys that were politically connected were getting the equivalent of $500,000 a year in today's dollars to build machines that just fell on the ground, that collapsed. And I think some of these things are just so hilarious. You watch them, so how could anyone ever think that would fly? But they did. And the Congress kept voting to more money. And that's just how it is. And so I just want to thank Jeffrey Tucker for this, for reminding me that I had once started this Wright brothers topic. We were going to have a show. I was going to do about a 20-minute segment on the Wright brothers back when we first started the show, but we kind of ran out of time. And I said, I don't think I really want to start this week. And then some other stuff came up the next week, and I never did it. And I always wanted to kind of talk about them. And I thought that this was the perfect time to do it because of those 3 paragraphs in the epilogue of his book, A Beautiful Anarchy, which is a marvelous book. I recommend it to all of you. So anyway, the music should be starting any second. Great time talking with all of you tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. We will see you next week, same time, same station. And I hope all of you can find a passion in your life to go out and do something great, something that no one else has ever done before, and be like the former 2 other co-hosts. David Kirk West. He left the show after a short time because his passion is making movies, and he's getting pretty good at it. He's won several contests. He's actually making a living at it. And Drew, his passion is the aquaponics, and he's doing a great thing there. There's that music. So I'll see you next week. Find a passion and go for it. We'll see you. Bye-bye.